Dr. Johnson, Dr.
Yeah,
Johnson,
yes.
may I
Go
ask
ahead.
a question?
You may.
Okay, thank you. So vis-a-vis that, what you just said about it has the effect of denying telecom, where the city of Ashland is currently awash in connectivity. So how would the case be made that if we decided to say, due to aesthetic reasons, that we don't want a 5G tower, a new cell tower in our historic district, how could you say that we're limiting telecom when we have tons of Wi-Fi, the city has its own Wi-Fi, we have, I mean, how would that argument work? I'm just confused by that.
Sure. Well, individual wireless service providers bought their licenses from the federal government, and it's managed by the Federal Communications Commission. They have, it's been determined, have a right to build out their network. So they're not, they may be operating Wi-Fi networks and they may be operating other types of communication systems, but the Telecom Act of 1996 and the section that we're referring to here tonight specifically deals with wireless connectivity to a public switch telephone network system. So that's your cell phone that you have on your in your purse or on your belt that you can dial a telephone number. Wi-Fi, you can't necessarily do that. You can use voice over Wi-Fi, voice over IP technology to make telephone calls, but that's really not what the 1996 is dealing with. It's dealing with the public switch telephone network and the commercial mobile telephone networks.
Okay, I misspoke. What I'm trying to get at is, does it say specifically 5G? Because we have cell signal and cell ability all over town. So if we didn't go 5G, does it say we have to?
So 5G is a new technology. It means different things to different people. It came from 4G, 4G came from 3G, and so on. These were all the various technologies that were used through the decades, bringing the wireless network to the point that it is today. No to 5G, you know, I will defer that. That's a legal question for your council to answer. But my understanding of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 is you can't just say no. You can't deny or have the effect of denying the provision of wireless services, whether it's 4G, whether it's 5G, or whether it's any other new technology that deals with wireless communications. So
with
that's
respect,
one of the constraints
I can't understand how you can say that when it says service gap. In other words, the way that they can do it is they can say we have a service gap, but if we have no service gaps, how can you say that we can't say no?
Well, there's two types of service gaps. One is whether or not there's actually a wireless signal that could support at least one conversation. And the city of Ashland pretty much is covered with that. You have wireless service throughout the entire city where at least one user can use that system. Now, if you want to have 10,000 users using the system, now you need to talk about capacity issues. It's not just a matter of having a wireless signal. It's a matter of subdividing that wireless signal into small cells, which then can support 10 or 15 users at a time. And that's where you build up to the 10,000 users. So a significant coverage gap, some will argue that only has to do with whether or not there's a radio frequency signal in the area. But as the FCC determined when they went out and measured these data rates, they found that it wasn't just wireless signal level that was important, it was whether or not the network could actually support the kind of use that we expect to have from our mobile phones. And when we're competing with thousands of other users for the resources of the network, you need to have smaller cells. So that goes back to the analogy of having a stadium for 30,000 people or a conference room for 10 people. Okay. You can build 30,000 people out of individual small 10-person conference rooms, and everybody can have their own conversations.
I get it. We get it. Thank you for explaining. We get it. Councilor Graham, you had a question?
Yeah, it's sort of to follow on, Mayor. Thank you. So who decides if we want service that meets 10,000 people on Park Street? That's my question. You know, what is the standard by which, if it's not the old standard, maybe they haven't developed it yet, but what is the new standard that says that this is not adequate? What you have here is not adequate. I guess that's my first question. Because It doesn't seem that they have taken away the requirement to show a gap. They're just simply saying that the way we've been doing the gap assessment is not really working. So how do we
That's
get to that
correct.
number?
That's very well put. So back to that report, which was the coverage map investigation and the staff report from the FCC. What they found was you couldn't just base this on propagation plots. You had to base it on system capacity. So there are measures. You may have looked at propagation plots in the past for sites that were proposed. There's new metrics that can be introduced that show how many users are trying to use the system and whether or not that system is over capacity in that area. When it is, that shows that there's a significant gap in service. It's not a coverage gap because the radio signal is there. It's just that the network can't support it from one base station for that many users. So there are other types of plots and other types of data that one can look at to establish whether or not there is a significant coverage gap. And that can be laid before a planning or a zoning board to make an ascertainment as to whether or not it's justified to put that site in. And I do encourage the code to have that type of provision. And you already have that in your telecom ordinance, that there needs to be shown need. It needs to be the least intrusive, and Ms. Wilkins and I agree on that particular point. It does need to be the least intrusive of all the alternatives that are technically viable, and I'll add that phrase because there's no sense in putting an alternate site on the air that doesn't work. It has to actually provide the service that people want to have to use their cell phones. So I hope that helps answer your question. It's a different set of metrics than wireless RF propagation plots, but RF wireless propagation plots are still valuable tools to try to show where there is a chance of coverage.
Thank you. I don't know that I feel satisfied that you completely answered Councilor Graham's question, because the question was who decides how many thousands of people need to have a clean signal, and I don't know that. Can I ask Ms. Wilkins, what's your take on that question? Because I think the plot somewhat hinges on it. Can I hear you?
We go back to whether there's a gap in service. Now, Mr. Campanelli, I believe, said that with respect to propagation maps, that propagation maps are not sufficient in and of themselves, that they need to be supported by drive tests. And you need to get an accurate measurement of where there is a gap in service. And a gap in service is not whether you can get 5G or 4G or 3G, it's whether you can actually make a phone call. And just as the court said in Flower Hill, that they underscored that while new wireless technology may provide greater capacity and speed, their installation is not protected nor preempted by the Telecommunications Act. And similarly, with respect to 5G, what happens is that what people don't realize is that when you make a call, sometimes the call may drop from 4G down to 3G it may downshift in order to maintain the call, but you don't realize it's seamless. So it's not like you need to have 5G or you need to have 4G, you just need to make a phone call. And so that is not a very good case for 5G. 5G is really just, has really very little to do with phone service. It can certainly help phone service, but it's really more for downstreaming and for videos and that kind of thing. And that's not protected by the Telecommunications Act.